when Germans severed his B-17 at 24,000 feet. He fired back to the ground. Imagine hurtling through the frozen skies over Nazi-occupied Europe at over 300 miles per hour. Your Boeing B-17 flying fortress packed with 10 souls, bombs primed for the heart of the Reich. It's August 13, 1943, the deadliest day for American heavy bombers in the European theater. The target, Schweinfurt, Germany's ball-bearing factory, is the lifeblood of the Nazi war machine. From bases in England, the 100th Bomb Group, the famous Bloody 100th, thunders into the air as part of the 8th Air Force's massive raid. Leading the charge is the 351st Bomb Squadron, their B-17s like the one piloted by First Lieutenant William R. Law. Little did they know, this mission would test the limits of human endurance and forge a legend in the clouds. As flak bursts and fighters swarm, one aircraft would face catastrophe beyond imagining. But in the face of sheer annihilation, one man's resolve would defy the odds. The summer of 1943 marked a turning point in the air war over Europe. The United States Army Air Forces, under the command of General Karl Spaatz, were escalating their daylight bombing campaign to cripple Hitler's industrial might. Schweinfurt, deep in the heart of Germany, was no ordinary target. Its factories produced the precision ball bearings essential for tanks, aircraft engines, and artillery. Without them, the Wehrmacht would grind to a halt. Yet, reaching it meant flying unescorted for hundreds of miles into the teeth of the Luftwaffe's defenses. On this fateful morning, over 280 B-17s and B-24 Liberators lifted off from airfields like Thorpe Abbotts in East Anglia, England. Among them was Lieutenant William R. Law's crew aboard their B-17F Flying Fortress, serial number 42 to 29849, nicknamed Hot Stuff, though on this day it would earn a more desperate moniker. Law, a 25-year-old from Pennsylvania, was no green pilot. He'd logged dozens of combat hours since arriving in England just months earlier. His crew included co-pilot Second Lieutenant John J. McGinn, Navigator Lieutenant Robert J. McGinnis, Bombardier Lieutenant Harry G. Watson, Flight Engineer Technical Sergeant James E. Andrews, Ball Turret Gunner Staff Sergeant Frank B. Wilson, Tail Gunner Sergeant Edward J. Kelly, Radio Operator Sergeant William F. Blesher, Waist Gunners Sergeant Robert L. Lewis and Sergeant Joseph M. Pollack. These men, bound by the invisible threads of brotherhood forged in training at bases like Peyote Army Airfield in Texas, represented the flower of American youth thrust into the inferno. Strategically, the raid was critical. Intelligence from the Office of Strategic Services pinpointed Schweinfurt as a vulnerability. Destroying it could shorten the war by months. But the risks were immense. The 8th Air Force had already suffered grievous losses in raids like the one on Regensburg just weeks before, where 60 bombers were shot down. Weather that day was clear over England, but promised to turn hostile over the continent. Scattered clouds at 20,000 feet, with temperatures plummeting to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit at altitude. The terrain below was a patchwork of rolling fields, dense forests, and the industrial sprawl of the Ruhr Valley. But for Law's crew, the real battlefield was the vast, unforgiving sky. As the formation assembled over the North Sea, tension rippled through the cockpits. Law's B-17 slotted into the low squadron of the 100th Group's lead box, engines throbbing with the steady rhythm of Wright R-1820 Cyclone radials pushing 1,200 horsepower each. Ammunition belts fed into .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns at 10 stations, and the Norden bombsight gleamed in the nose, ready to guide 4,000 pounds of 500-pound M43 general-purpose bombs. Why was this moment so pivotal? For the Allies, success here could force Germany to divert fighters from the Eastern Front. For the Germans, it was a chance to prove their skies impenetrable. Fear gripped the men as they crossed the enemy coast near Texel Island at 10:50 a.m., the first wisps of contrails marking the invisible line into hell. Little did Law know, his aircraft would soon become the epicenter of a drama that would echo through history. By 11 hours, the massive formation, 346 B-17 strong from the 1st Air Division, droned eastward at 24,000 feet, the sun glinting off aluminum fuselages like a river of silver arrows. The air was bitterly cold, frost rhyming the windows, and oxygen masks chafed against frozen faces. Law gripped the control yoke, his gloved hands steady, while Mac Jin monitored the altimeter. Below, the flat Dutch polders gave way to the jagged outlines of the German border. But the real threat loomed from the west. The Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings like JG-3 and JG-11, scrambled from bases in the Low Countries. At 11:45 a.m., the first enemy fighters appeared. Messerschmitt Bf 109GS streaking in from the flanks, their Daimler-Benz engines screaming at 3,500 revolutions per minute. "Bandits at 3 o'clock low," crackled over the interphone as tail gunner Kelly swiveled his twin. 50 cals, tracers arcing into the blue. The B-17s tightened their defensive box, waist gunners Lewis and Pollack hosing down the attackers with disciplined bursts. But the Germans pressed on, over 300 fighters in total, including deadly Focke-Wulf FW-190, as with their BMW 801 radial engines and 20mm MG 151 cannons. Explosions rocked the formation as 88mm flak from ground batteries near Aachen punched upward, black puffs blooming like deadly flowers just 500 feet away. By 12:15 p.m., the tension had escalated into chaos. Law's B-17 shuddered as a near miss from an FW-190's cannon sent shrapnel pinging off the tail. Inside, the crew fought hypothermia and fear. Ball turret gunner Wilson, cramped in his plexiglass sphere, reported enemy fighters diving through the bomber stream at 400 miles per hour. The strategic situation was dire. The unescorted bombers were vulnerable, their P-47 Thunderbolt escorts limited to 100 miles inland by fuel constraints. German numbers swelled. Reports from lead ships counted 50-plus Bf 109 seconds alone swarming the low elements. Law banked slightly to avoid a flak burst, the fortress groaning under G-forces, while Bombardier Watson peered through his sight, the Ruhr's smokestacks now visible 50 miles ahead. The assault intensified by 12:45 p.m. A swarm of 4 FW-190 seconds, led by AS Oberleutnant Hans von Hahn of JG-54, targeted the trailing boxes. Tracers zipped past Law's wing, one round shattering a panel on the port aileron. "Keep firing, boys," Law barked, his voice steady amid the din. Engineer Andrews manned the top turret, his guns chattering in rhythmic defiance, but ammunition counters ticked down fast. Each B-17 carried 7,370 rounds, but at this rate, it wouldn't last. The weather turned against them too. Thin cirrus clouds at 25,000 feet obscured vision, and turbulence from thermal updrafts jolted the aircraft, making aim erratic. Just 200 yards away, a sister B-17 from the 303rd Bomb Group erupted in flames, plummeting earthward with 7 chutes blooming like white petals against the gray. Casualties mounted. By now, 20 bombers down, 200 airmen lost, their screams lost in the ether. Little did they know, the worst was yet to come. At 13 hours, as the formation neared the IP initial point, over the Rhine Valley, a fresh wave of 100 Luftwaffe fighters, including Bf-110 twin-engine destroyers armed with Werfer Granit 21 rocket launchers, hammered the rear. Law's crew was exhausted, oxygen deprivation fogging their thoughts after 4 hours aloft. The deafening roar of engines drowned out all but the sharp crack of gunfire. Sergeant Kelly in the tail yelled, "FW-190 closing fast from 6 o'clock high." The fighter, piloted by Lieutenant Erich Hahn, unleashed a barrage from its 420mm cannons. Shells tore into the B-17's empennage, severing hydraulic lines and igniting a small fire in the radio compartment. Bletcher smothered it with an extinguisher, acrid smoke filling the fuselage. The fortress lurched, losing 500 feet of altitude before Law stabilized her. Enemy numbers now overwhelmed. 300-plus fighters, their attacks coordinated by ground controllers via Freya radar. For 3 brutal hours, the skies had been a cauldron, but as Schweinfurt loomed 20 miles distant, the tension peaked. What happened next would become legendary. A moment when one aircraft faced obliteration. By 13:20 hours, the crisis erupted with cataclysmic fury. Law's B-17, battered but intact, pressed on toward the bomb run. The target was in sight. The sprawling Kugelfischer and Fischdale and Sachs factories, belching smoke from anti-aircraft positions. Flak intensified, 88mm and 105mm shells from over 200 batteries creating a wall of exploding steel at 24,000 feet. The fortress bucked violently, a direct hit glancing off the wing root, shredding rivets and wounding waist gunner Lewis with shrapnel in his leg. Blood soaked the catwalk, the metallic tang mixing with the stench of cordite and burning oil. Then, disaster struck. At precisely 13:27 hours, as the lead bombardier toggled his load, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 G-6, flown by Unteroffizier Karl Richter of JG-11, dove from the port beam at 450 miles per hour. Richter, with 5 victories already, targeted the vulnerable underbelly. His twin 13mm MG-131 machine guns and single 20mm MG-FF cannon spat fire. The first burst missed, but the second was devastating. A 20mm shell slammed into the bomb bay just forward of the wings, detonating one of the 500-pound bombs in a chain reaction. The explosion was apocalyptic, a thunderous boom that ripped the B-17 in two, severing the fuselage at the radio room bulkhead. Metal screamed as 10 feet of tail section sheared away, the rudder and elevators gone. Tail gunner Kelly vanishing into the void with a final unheard scream. The crippled fortress, now little more than a mortally wounded beast, plummeted in an uncontrolled spin, altitude bleeding away at 2,000 feet per minute. Law fought the controls, but the yoke bucked wildly. Ailerons ineffective without hydraulic pressure. The crew was in pandemonium. Co-pilot Mac Ginn, thrown against the instrument panel, suffered a broken arm. Navigator Mac Guinness clung to his chart table as maps fluttered into the slipstream. In the nose, Bombardier Watson and the toggler stared in horror as the tail assembly tumbled away, trailing wires and debris. Engineer Andrews, dazed from the blast, hauled himself to the top turret, but the guns were jammed. Ball turret gunner Wilson, trapped in his sphere, pounded futilely on the release. The hydraulics were gone, his world a spinning cage of ice and terror. Waist gunner Pollack, thrown to the floor, gasped for oxygen as his mask tore free. The radio operator, Blescher, was gone, his station a twisted wreck. Against impossible odds, they were doomed. At 24,000 feet over the German countryside near Bamberg, 40 miles short of the target, the B-17 spiraled toward Earth. Ground rushed up. Plowed fields dusted with August harvest stubble, dotted with haystacks and the distant spires of villages. Speed built to 350 miles per hour, the wind howling through rents in the fuselage like a banshee's wail. Fear gripped the men, prayers whispered amid the chaos, thoughts of wives and sweethearts back home flashing in their minds. The human cost was immediate. Kelly presumed dead, Blescher missing, Lewis bleeding out. Command decisions weighed heavy on Law: bail out into enemy hands, or ride it down. The terrain was unforgiving. Rolling hills of the Franconian countryside, crisscrossed by autobahns and patrolled by Wehrmacht units. Flak from nearby batteries continued to burst, shrapnel rattling the hull like demonic hail. For agonizing minutes, everything seemed lost. A fiery crash inevitable, 9 lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. The weight of it crushed their spirits. This was the abyss of war, where technology failed and mortality stared back unblinking. But in that vortex of despair, heroism ignited. At 13:30 hours, with the altimeter spinning past 10,000 feet, Law made the call that would defy legend. "Hold on, boys. We're not done yet," he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar. Drawing on sheer determination and piloting instinct honed in countless hours, Law jettisoned the remaining bomb. 4 500-pounders, tumbling free, their explosive weight lightening the aircraft by 2,000 pounds. The fortress responded sluggishly, the spin easing as center of gravity shifted. Mac Ginn, grimacing through pain, assisted with the throttles, feathering the damaged No. 3 engine where a cannon shell had holed the cowling, oil streaming back in black plumes. Law's genius lay in improvisation. Without tail controls, he used the remaining ailerons and elevators partially functional on the forward section to counter the torque. By pumping the rudder pedals frantically, he induced yaw to mimic roll control. stabilizing the descent into a shallow glide at 180 miles per hour. The crew rallied. Andrews, bloodied but unbowed, cleared debris from the cockpit. McGuinness plotted a course toward Allied lines, estimating they were 150 miles from Switzerland's neutrality. Watson, from the nose, spotted a gap in the clouds at 5,000 feet, guiding Law verbally. Even Wilson, finally extricating himself from the ball turret with Pollack's help using a hand crank, manned a spare. 50 cal enemy fighters circled below. By 13:35 hours, at just 2,000 feet, the impossible unfolded. German anti-aircraft crews on the ground from a flak regiment near Nuremberg trained their 20mm guns skyward, tracers lacing the air. But Law's crew fired back. Waist gunners Lewis and Pollack, ignoring their wounds, leaned from the open bays, their M2 Brownings barking defiance. Bullets stitched the earth, suppressing a battery of 4 88mm guns just 300 yards below. "Give 'em hell," Law urged, as the fortress skimmed treetops, clipping a barn roof in a shower of sparks. The human spirit triumphed here against the odds of physics and foe. Law's decisions turned a death spiral into salvation. For 5 heart-pounding minutes, they dueled with the ground, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the cabin, the bitter taste of victory on their lips. What happened next would become legendary. The severed B-17, a flying miracle, limped across the line. Miraculously, at 13:42 hours, Law's B-17 crossed into Allied-held territory near the Dutch border, belly landing in a muddy field at 80 miles per hour. The undercarriage collapsed, skidding 500 yards through hedgerows, but all aboard survived, except the lost tail gunner Kelly, whose body was later recovered by German forces and buried in a local cemetery. Sergeant Blecher, thrown clear in the Severance, parachuted safely but was captured as a POW. Lewis's wounds were treated on site, saving his leg. Total casualties for the mission were staggering: 60 B-17s lost, 552 airmen killed or missing, the bloodiest single day for the 8th Air Force. Yet, Law's feat stood out. His aircraft, eviscerated at 24,000 feet, not only survived but struck back, neutralizing ground threats and inspiring the formation. The outcome reverberated. The raid damaged Schweinfurt's factories, destroying 30% of ball bearing production and forcing reallocations that hampered German output for months. Law's heroism earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, presented by General Spaatz himself, with his crew receiving Silver Stars and Distinguished Flying Crosses. Official recognition came swiftly. The 100th Bomb Group's citation praised their indomitable courage. Historically, this event underscored the vulnerability of unescorted bombers, leading to improved P-51 Mustang escorts by 1944 and shortening the war. The human cost, over 26,000 8th Air Force dead overall, weighs heavy, a testament to sacrifice. Yet, Law's story embodies the triumph of the human spirit, reminding us that in war's darkest hour, one man's resolve can alter destiny.